Behind every failed student, there is a teacher who destroyed them completely and used them as a tool, starting with the ones who raised us, the mentors from our childhood. Lotso from the Toy Story. Lotso is a pink-colored, strawberry-scented teddy bear who is also the leader of Sunside Daycare in Toy Story 3. Whenever new toys used to come to the daycare center, Lotso used to talk to them very friendly and nicely. He used to show them that he is a very caring and mature mentor, but the reality was something else. Actually, he was the dictator of Sunnyside Daycare, and he wanted his right to everything, and he used to control everything. Well, in my opinion, he is a bad teacher because his entire teaching style was based on manipulation and fear. He used to show a fake delusion world to new toys, where he used to show them nicely, but in reality, he was intentionally put in those danger rooms where toddlers used to come and play with them and break them. He used to live in a safe and secure room with his and his close followers, where mature kids used to come and play with them and consider them a part of their life. His entire leadership was not a guidance, but a control. And the worst moment was when he got a chance to become a hero, and he chose the dark side. This was the scene when all the toys were trapped on a garbage conveyor belt and were taken by the incinerator. At that time, Lotso could have saved everyone, but he didn't do anything like that. Instead of saving them, he himself left them there to die and was trying to escape from there. And Lotso's guidance had a very bad impact on the people around him. And some cute innocent characters like Big Baby and Ken, these two had also come under his manipulative tricks, and they were supporting his made system. But they say that what goes around comes around. He had to face a lot of bad consequences for this, where in the end, he betrayed everyone, and all the toys went against him, where in the end, his whole manipulative toxic system and all the rules he made get destroyed. And then Lotso is tied up in front of a garbage truck and he permanently lives there for the rest of his life. The fact is that Lotso was not a leader. He was also a dictator like ordinary politicians who used to put a mask of innocence. He never had any intention of teamwork or helping any toy. He just wanted people to live in fear in his system. Next, Gendo Ikari. He is the commander of NERV and the father of Shinji Ikari in Neon Genesis Evangelion. He is simultaneously Shinji's boss, his authority figure, and the one person whose approval Shinji desperately craves his entire life. Whenever Shinji needed his father, Gendo used to show him cold commands and distant authority. He used to look like a powerful leader on whom Shinji could trust, but the reality was something else. Actually, he was a manipulator who had abandoned his son years ago and only returned to use him. He used to control everything by fear and emotional famine. Well, in my opinion, he is a bad teacher because his entire teaching style was based on manipulation. He didn't teach Shinji anything, he weaponized him. After his wife Yui died, Gendo left young Shinji to be raised by a stranger with zero parental contact. Then he re-entered Shinji's life only to strap his traumatized, emotionally starved teenage son into a giant mech to fight apocalyptic monsters. He used to show Shinji a fake world where obedience meant love, but in reality, he was intentionally putting him in life-threatening situations with no training, no guidance, and no warmth. He used to live in his command center with his inner circle where he was safe and secure, making cold decisions. Meanwhile, Shinji was broken down mentally, forced into dangerous battles, stripped of his childhood. His leadership was not guidance, but control through fear. If Shinji didn't perform, he was worthless. And the worst moment was when Shinji arrived at NERV for the first time in years and was summoned by his father, and he believed that this might be a reunion, a moment where his father would acknowledge after all those years of absence. At that moment, Gendo could have been a real father, but instead, his response was immediate and cold. Get in the robot. No hello, no acknowledgement of the years of abandonment, just a command. He didn't save him, he betrayed him, and Gendo's control had a bad impact on the people who support him. Because all the rules of Gendo, all his commands, had made NERV a place of psychological torture where all the pilots around him that questioned his methods, they used to live in a fear environment where all the young pilots that came to NERV, if they didn't obey him, he used to punish them through isolation and emotional abandonment. And innocent characters like Shinji, Rei, and Asuka, these three had also come under his manipulative tricks, and they were supporting his system because they were starved for his approval. Shinji especially was so broken that he was willing to risk death repeatedly just for one moment of acknowledgement that never came. Their entire lives were destroyed by his control. But they say what you give is what you get, as he had to face a lot of bad consequences consequences for this. In the end, when his grand plan for instrumentality collapsed, all the pilots went against him. His whole manipulative toxic system and all the control he tried to maintain got destroyed. And then Gendo faced complete psychological destruction, not through physical punishment, but through confrontation with his own failures. He was forced to admit that he never knew how to face his son and was afraid of his own child. He lost everything because of his obsession with control. The fact is that Gendo was not a leader, he was a dictator like ordinary people, who put a mask of authority in power. His greatest crime wasn't a superweapon or a conspiracy, it was simply never once telling his son that he mattered. Next is Mother Gothel from Tangled. Mother Gothel is the primary antagonist of Disney's Tangled and the woman who raised Rapunzel in an isolated tower for 18 years. Whenever Rapunzel tried to learn about the world, Mother Gothel used to talk to her very sweetly and nicely. She used to show her that she is a very caring and devoted mother. On top of that, she used to look like a very protective guardian on whom Rapunzel could trust, but the reality was something else. Actually, she was a kidnapper who had stolen Rapunzel as an infant. She was a manipulator who wanted Rapunzel's magic hair to stay young and immortal forever. She used to control everything, Rapunzel's thoughts, her fears, her beliefs about herself. Well, in my opinion, she is a bad teacher because her entire teaching style was based on emotional manipulation and psychological abuse. She never taught Rapunzel anything useful about the real world. Instead, she taught her that the world is dangerous, cruel, and that Rapunzel is too naive and helpless to survive without her. She used to live in that tower with Rapunzel, pretending to be her mother, while secretly using her magic hair to stay young. Meanwhile, Rapunzel was psychologically broken down, conditioned to believe she was fragile, incompetent, and entirely dependent on a woman who viewed her as nothing but a tool. Her entire relationship was not love but control and manipulation. And the worst moment was when Rapunzel finally discovered the truth that she was the lost princess and that Mother Gothel had kidnapped her. At that time, she could have accepted the reality and let Rapunzel go, but instead, her response was kind of manipulative. She convinced Rapunzel that Flynn only wanted the crown, engineered his apparent betrayal, and dragged her back to the tower. She turned Rapunzel's greatest moment of self-discovery into a weapon against her. As soon as Rapunzel tried to stand up for herself and be independent, she felt guilty. Rapunzel was so brainwashed that she immediately believed Gothel's lies about Flynn. She had been taught to associate love with control, but later around, she had to face brutal consequences for this. When Flynn cut Rapunzel's hair, he stripped Gothel of the magic she had spent centuries killing and manipulating to preserve. Without it, she aged rapidly and crumbled to dust. The most frightening thing about her is that she was so good at manipulation. Even Rapunzel couldn't see it until it was almost too late. Next is Orochimaru from Naruto series. Orochimaru is one of the legendary San and An elite trio of ninja considered among the greatest ever produced by the Hidden Leaf Village. He was a prodigy, a former student of the third Hokage himself, and at one point was considered the most gifted shinobi of his generation. Whenever young ninja came to train under him, Orochimaru used to talk to them very intelligently and nicely. He used to show them that he is a very talented mentor and a powerful teacher, but the reality was something else. Actually, he was a monster who treated human beings as experiments and vessels. He wanted power above everything, and he used to control everything through manipulation and corruption. Well, in my opinion, he is a bad teacher because his entire teaching style was based on using people as tools for his own obsession. He never taught his students real ninja skills or moral values. Instead, he taught them that power justifies everything, that the only thing that matters is becoming stronger no matter the cost. He used to show his students a fake world where training meant becoming powerful, but in reality, he was intentionally pushing them to their breaking point, implanting cursed seals into their bodies without consent, which granted power but slowly corrupted their minds and bodies and created dependency. He used to operate in secret labs where he conducted horrific experiments. Meanwhile, his students were psychologically broken down, branded like animals, turned into vessels for his twisted ambitions. His entire relationship with his students was not mentorship, but exploitation and control through corruption. And the worst moment was what he did to Sasuke. Orochimaru approached a grieving, revenge-obsessed teenager at his most vulnerable right. After the Forest of Death tournament, when Sasuke had lost everything and was desperate for power. At that moment, Orochimaru could have guided him toward healing and real strength, but instead, he branded Sasuke with a cursed seal without consent. He didn't mentor Sasuke, he infected him. And then he spent years engineering circumstances to drive Sasuke away from everyone who could have saved him, purely to collect him as a future vessel for his own immortality. And Orochimaru's guidance had a very bad impact on everyone around him, because all the rules of Orochimaru, all his teachings, had made his organization a place of psychological torture and body horror, where all the students around him that questioned his methods, they used to live in a fear environment, where all the young ninja that came to train under him, if they didn't obey him completely, he used to punish them through painful experiments and deeper corruption. And innocent characters like Anko, Sasuke, and Kabuto, these three had also come under his manipulative tricks, and they were supporting his system because they were desperate for power. Anko was left with a cursed seal and psychological trauma for years. Sasuke's entire life was redirected toward darkness and isolation. Kabuto lost himself in a way that he began to physically transform himself into Orochimaru. His teachings destroyed them, but as you know, every coin have two sides, and yeah, later, he had to face consequences for this. He was defeated multiple times, sealed away and believed dead more than once. But the frustrating reality is that Naruto ultimately never killed him, and by the end of Shippuden, Orochimaru was essentially rehabilitated, walking free. Even participating in the Fourth Great Ninja War on the side of the heroes, his whole manipulative toxic system never fully crumbled the way it should have. He escaped true justice. Orochimaru is what happens when a genius is never taught that people are not tools. Each solved a severed relationship between teacher and student and turned it into a transaction. Give me your body, your loyalty, your future, and I will give you power. You were never meant to survive. And the tragedy is that the system that created him never fully answered for him either. Next is Shifu from Kung Fu Panda. The Master Shifu is the headmaster of the Jade Palace and the direct master of the Furious Five in Kung Fu Panda. He is a raccoon that was a student of the legendary Grand Master Oogway and devoted his life to his art and discipline, the Kung Fu. He is also the adoptive father to Tai Lung, the snow leopard that he nurtured as an infant and is lost at the most crucial point in a manner that has triggered the whole storyline. He would demonstrate to him that he is the one chosen, the one who is destined to be the Dragon Warrior. However, the truth of the matter was different. In fact, Shifu was using the means of creating a son, and at the same time using the means to destroy him. He wished Tai Lung to be something he was supposed to be, to do the impossible, to grow up to be the Dragon Warrior, not because it was what Tai Lung needed, but because it was what the identity of Shifu lived hinged on. To my mind, he is a bad teacher and a bad father, since his whole approach to mentorship was developed on conditional love in the form of devotion. However, in the real sense, he was purposely building the whole of Tai Lung on a destiny that was not Shifu to pledge upon a dragon scroll that was never assured, a validation that could be revoked any time. He gave his all to Tai Lung as he constructed the same circumstances that would ruin him. And the most bad part did not belong to drama and violence, but rather to silence in the Hall of Heroes, where Oogway stared at Tai Lung and said no. Tai Lung, who had sacrificed everything, who had been told that this is his time in his life, turned to the one person who had promised him everything. Shifu might have been a true father at that time. He might have defended his son. He might have reassured him that it did not matter how much his worth might be in the Dragon Scroll, and that he kept him in the rejection. However, he replied with nothing. He did not advocate, and instead of his son, he selected the posture of the institution. And the failure of Shifu affected all those under his command in a devastating way. Tigress was the victim of another variant of this damage. She's been brought up in the shade of Tai Lung. Having never felt the warmth with which Shifu had never shown his face to anybody after Tai Lung had betrayed him, Shifu was punished in the most personal and sincere way. He was afraid and guilty in the first movie. The arrival of Pole pushed him to face all he had buried, his failures with Tai Lung, and decide to be different. The thing is that Shifu was not an ideal mentor. He was a half-baked one, which in a way causes even greater harm, as the love was so real that it could hurt when it did not. He built a son, then he built a villain, never realizing that it was the same person after all. Next is Koro Sensei from Assassination Classroom. The main character is Koro Sensei, the homeroom teacher of Class 3E. of Kurugeoka Junior High School in Assassination Classroom, a tentacled, almost indestructible alien who travels at Mach 20, threatening to blow the Earth up before the year ends unless killed. He educates the children of Class 3E, a team of underachieving, discarded teenagers at the institution. Yet at the same time, he's preparing them to be his assassins. Kuro-sensei would talk to them with love and sincerity whenever he was in front of his classroom. He would demonstrate to them that he knows they have a potential and that they are good. Top of that, he would resemble a teacher who viewed them as individuals, but not as losers and a guide that they could rely on fully. Nevertheless, the truth was different. In fact, he was an animal that came in knowing that he would come out knowing that the parting would be brutal, and decided to go ahead and make himself the most significant individual in their lives. He was to instruct them as a practice to kill him, and he took this impossibility at its true value. Well, to me, he is an involved bad teacher since his whole association with Class 3E has been established upon a core lie that he never completely resolves. And the most terrible thing was not a moment of cruelty but of enlightenment, when the truth about his former life as the first Reaper was revealed, and the students understood that the man who made them believe they could achieve something was the murderer who was linked to the chain of the events that led the students to that very classroom. His friendliness and his wound could not be separated, and the pupils had to carry both of them without entirely calculating what it was. And the effect of Kuro-sensei on his pupils was far-reaching and twofold. All students of Class 3E developed, as the show rightfully deserves. Nagisa discovered purpose, Karma learned humility, Kano confronted her grief. It is actual change that results out of authentic mentorship. Yet all those students, too, spent their formative year emotionally attached to a person they were also conditioning to murder. They were instructed to love one and then kill him. They say what goes round comes around. There were repercussions to him. Kuro-sensei passed away peacefully in the hands of his students, having taken the time to ensure that they would all be fine without him in his last year of life. It is among the most heart-wrecking anime endings, but consequence is consequence. The thing is that Kuro-sensei is the worst bad teacher on any list and the most convoluted one. He is the villain who was never really a villain, the teacher who was never really a teacher, and somehow he was both, and he was both ideal. Next is Principal Skinner from The Simpsons. Seymour Skinner is a principal of the Springfield Elementary School and one of the most frequent figures of authority in The Simpsons. He is a Vietnam veteran, perennial mama boy, and a career school administrator who has devoted his career to managing a school whose budget is inadequate, understaffed, and constantly on the brink of failure. He is the direct figure of authority of all the children in Springfield and a professional superior of all the teachers such as Edna Krabappel. Skinner would give himself authority and professionalism anytime a group of students approached him with questions and requests regarding how to do things. He would demonstrate to them that he is an extremely committed administrator and a strict educator. However, the facts were different. In fact, he was a burned-out bureaucrat who misconstrued maintenance of order with education. Well, in my view, he is a bad teacher and a bad authority figure since all of his education strategy was founded on a bureaucratic survival. He did not even teach children to think critically and to grow. Institutional cowardice, arrested development, and codependency were the models that he modeled to each and every student who was observing him daily. His leadership was solely education but administrative theater meant to make the system appear functional, and it was literally letting down the children within it. And the worst of all was not an individual scene but a pattern, that every time a student, most commonly Bart Simpson, truly cried out to be engaged, and Skinner answered with an appeal to punishment, suspension, or administrative action. His failure was only caught in the episode where Bart was found out as possibly gifted. Here was Skinner given a truly smart, imaginative student, one with some actual potential. And the first thought that came to him was not to assist the student, but to be suspicious and fight against him. He saved the system and not the child. He observed a student who was not conforming, and his solutions were find a way to keep him in check rather than to grow him. Skinner might have been a genuine mentor at this time. He would have invested his potential in Bart. He would have had an opportunity to change his life. Instead, he reacted by being defensive of the institution. Bart Simpson was the most apparent victim of the failures of Skinner. He was actually a creative child, very active and bright, and had gone through a system that had no system and a figure whose main weapon was punishment. The show occasionally identifies that Bart might have become something in a different coding with alternative treatment, that his intelligence and charisma existed. All the children in the Springfield Elementary had become victims of mediocrity at the hands of Skinner. But they tell us that what circles round comes round. He always got it in the funny way, humiliated by Chalmers, cut off by his mother, outwitted by Bart. But in the institutional sense, he had but little. He continued to work decades with no regard to performance, whether he did a good job or not, and the system which allowed his mediocrity did not change in any meaningful way. His entire institution-toxic system did not really fail. The thing is that Principal Skinner was not a villain, and that is exactly what is meant. He is the image of institutional mediocrity, and that is precisely the reason that he is so devastating. Next is Medusa Gorgon from Soul Eater. Medusa Gorgon is one of the main antagonists of Soul Eater, and one of the most disturbing villains in the whole series. She works as a cover nurse in the DWMA, the Death Weapon Meister Academy, the school focused on producing students to attack witches and monsters. She is a witch that is centuries old, a brilliant scientist in black magic and biological mother of Krona. Medusa willingly used to give attention and care to Krona whenever he used to come to her in search of guidance and love. She also used to appear as a caring parent on whom Krona could rely fully. However, the truth was otherwise. In fact, she was a monster who stared at her own child and could see nothing but an experiment to be demolished and dominated. Well, I think she is a bad teacher and a bad mother, since she embodies the most full portrait of parental and institutional abuse in one person in the series. She had never taught Krona how to love or be a human. Instead, she was teaching them intimidation, obedience, and utter dependence on her approval. Being a nurse at the DWMA, she was portrayed as warm and approachable as she collected intelligence and planted literal snake vectors among students and staff to control them. But as a mother, she was much worse. She lived Krona entirely on her own. She tortured them with years of both mental and physical abuse. She imprisoned Krona in black rooms bare of any lights as a form of punishment on failures perceived. She forced them to kill tiny things in their early training and corrected the emotional reaction to the hateful act. She put black blood in them, making her own baby an experiment since she was born. The influence of Medusa was very bad on all people around her, due to the fact that all the rules of Medusa, all her teachings, had turned the DWMA into a haven of concealed death where all the students and staff surrounding her were in danger of being manipulated. The trespassing of Medusa in the DWMA had caused instability to the whole academy and endangered all the students and teachers. But they tell me that what comes round goes round. She would have to pay a price to this. Medusa was killed at the very beginning by Stein in spirit, but her soul was transferred to Young Girl and she did not stop working. She was later on killed once more by her own sister Arachne in a family betrayal incident that was a perfect reflection of how she treated all people around her. However, the series is sincere enough to admit that even her death would not be able to fix the damage. She enwrapped herself in nurse whites and motherly speech and scientific isolation and made each of them cover with her abuse. She stared at her own child and he enjoyed an experiment. She stared at a school with children and considered that it is a resource. It was not motherhood that she had done to Krona. It was wicked with a human mask. Next is Baron Zemo from Avengers, Earth's Mightiest Heroes. One of the major villains of Avengers, Earth's Mightiest Heroes, is Baron Heinrich Zemo, the former HYDRA scientist, mastermind during the World War II, who was frozen into the modern world, and the founder and leader of the Masters of Evil, a group of supervillains brought together with the sole purpose of destroying the Avengers. He is a strategist, an ideologue, and a man whose whole personality is stilled into the philosophy that power and supremacy can grant him dominance over others absolutely. Zemo would talk to his members of the Masters of Evil in an authoritative and visionary tone whenever he recruited them. He also used to appear as a strong leader who they could entrust and follow to achieve victory. But the fact was otherwise. In fact, he was a man who could not get them to be a team, but a tool to be put into services and dropped. He desired to have domination over everything, and he would dominate everything by the use of contempt and ideology that superior people were supposed to rule over the weak. Well, to me, the man is a bad teacher and a bad authority figure because his whole leadership code was constructed on the basis of contempt, inviting the cloak of ideology. He never nurtured the folks under him, never making an effort to know them or to grow them beyond what they could bring to his cause. He was a leader by excellence other than a motivator. His philosophy that individuals of superior kind had a right to lead him tainted all the dynamics in the Masters of Evil. And the most awful scene was the attack of the Masters of the Evil on Avengers Mansion, one of the most violent scenes in the whole show. Zemo made a well-planned attack and seized the biggest part of the Avengers and Mansion. What made it his defining moment though was the way he handled the aftermath, not only with cold, theatrical superiority, but also in handling the captured Avengers as a prize to be shown as an example of his superiority, but not an enemy that should be even acknowledged with any respect. This is when Zemo might have exercised moderation. He would have been able to recognize the success of his team. Rather, he made the victory his personal victory, going around his conquest with his head held high like a man inspecting property he possessed. The Masters of Evil led by Zemo was a picture of what occurs when an authority figure does not take followers as valuable assets. The members were set out, discarded, and blamed to fail, without having any real association with the cause of the leader. But they say the same thing: what goes round comes round. Throughout the series, his schemes backfired and the Avengers resorted to strapping down the Masters of the Evil and destroying them. His ideological certainty, which was his strongest asset as a schemer, turned his most serious weakness. The thing is that Baron Zemo was not a leader. He was a narcissist man who created a team of people to reflect his superiority. The Avengers are not the only ones who defeated him. The natural result of guiding people and at the same time harboring contempt towards them was his losing. That is the real extent of his failure. Next, Scar from The Lion King is the younger brother of King Mufasa and the uncle of Simba in Disney's The Lion King. He holds the title of heir to the Pride Lands and serves as a senior member of the royal family, someone who should by position and blood be a guide, protector, and mentor to the young prince. Whenever Simba came to him for guidance, Scar used to talk to him very warmly and nicely, but the reality was something else. Actually, he was a manipulator who had orchestrated the death of his own brother. He wanted the throne above everything. Well, in my opinion, he never mentored Simba. He used him as a pawn. He fed Simba's natural curiosity and youthful bravado to manipulate him into dangerous situations. His entire relationship with his nephew was not mentorship, but exploitation and calculated murder. And the worst moment was the wildebeest stampede, the moment that defined Scar's cruelty. He orchestrated the death of his own brother, his own king. When Mufasa was hanging over the gorge with a chance to survive, Scar had the power to save him. But instead, he dangled him there and whispered, "Long live the king," before dropping him to his death. And then the most devastating part, he walked directly to the traumatized cub standing over his father's body and told him he killed Mufasa. He converted his own murder into a child's guilt in real time. Simba's entire life was destroyed by Scar's single well-placed lie, but later on, he had to face brutal consequences for this. Simba returned, confronted Scar, and forced him to admit the truth in front of the entire pride. Scar attempted one last act of treachery, but he was defeated. And then, in a moment of perfect justice, he tried to shift the blame onto the hyenas. The hyenas, who had been his allies throughout his reign, overheard his betrayal and turned on him. Scar died at the hands of the allies he had spent the whole film exploiting. The fact is that Scar was never a real uncle or a real king. He was a murderer who put a mask of wisdom and care. He never had any intention of helping Simba or protecting the Pride Lands. He only wanted the throne and power, no matter the cost. That is not villainy. That is cruelty with a vocabulary. Next is Shou Tucker Full Metal. Shou Tucker is a state alchemist licensed by the military and known as the Suing Life Alchemist for his specialty in biological transmutation. He is renowned for having created a chimera that could speak human words, a feat so rare it earned him his state alchemist certification. He is also a father to a young girl named Nina and her dog Alexander. Whenever Nina came to him seeking guidance and love, Shou Tucker used to show her warmth and affection. He used to show her that he is a very caring and devoted father, but the reality was something else. Actually, he was a monster who viewed his own daughter not as a person, but as raw material for his experiments. He wanted his state alchemist license above everything. Well, in my opinion, he's a bad teacher and a bad father because his entire life was built on the corruption of intellectual mentorship and human values. He never taught Nina anything about love or kindness or morality. Instead, He modeled the idea that academic achievement and the pursuit of knowledge justify any cost. He presented himself as a man of science pursuing knowledge. And the worst moment was when Shu Tucker, facing the annual review that would determine whether he kept his state alchemist license, made a calm, calculated decision. He fused his own daughter Nina and her dog Alexander into a chimera. He destroyed his own child to save his career. Nina Tucker spent her short life loving someone who was preparing to destroy her. But they say that what you give is what you get. He had to face consequences for this. In the 2003 anime, Tucker was eventually killed by Scar, who targeted state alchemists. In Brotherhood in the manga, he was arrested by the military. Shu Tucker didn't lose his mind or snap under pressure. He made a calm, calculated decision to destroy his daughter to save his career. He's the villain that exists in the real world, the person who chooses ambition over love and calls it science. Next is Syndrome by The Incredibles. Syndrome, born Buddy Pine, is the main antagonist of Pixar's The Incredibles. As a child, he was the self-proclaimed #1 fan of Mr. Furstor. Incredible and obsessive gifted young boy who showed up uninvited as a sidekick, calling himself Incrediboy. The relationship between young Buddy and Mr. Incredible was explicitly that of an eager apprentice seeking mentorship, validation, and acceptance from his hero. Well, in my opinion, Syndrome was a bad teacher and a bad authority figure because his entire philosophy was based on a lack of good mentorship. He is both the product of abandonment and a catastrophically destructive leader. Mr. Incredible's dismissal of young Buddy was cold, public, and humiliating, telling a child who idolized him that he works alone and to go home. That single moment of rejection planted something toxic in Buddy Pine. He never recovered from it. He had no mentor to redirect his genius toward anything constructive. Instead, he grew into the mirror image of Mr. Incredible's failure, a man who built an empire purely to prove that he mattered. He used to show the world a fake persona of innovation and technology, but in reality, he was intentionally luring and killing real superheroes for years, using them as test subjects to train his Omnidroid robots. He used to live in his base with his technology while superheroes died. And the worst moment was when Syndrome revealed his grand plan to Bob Parr, explaining with genuine glee his desire to destroy the very concept of being special. He had developed technology that would make everyone super, and when everyone is super, nobody will be. At that moment, Syndrome could have moved past his childhood trauma. He could have used his genius to build something constructive, but instead, he chose to burn it all down because a hero once told him to go home. And Syndrome's influence had a very bad impact on everyone around him. Syndrome's Omnidroid program killed superheroes across the entire world. Buddy Pine's genius could have changed the world. Instead, it nearly ended it. He had to face consequences for this. Syndrome was defeated by the Incredibles working as a family, the exact thing he never had and could never build. Syndrome is what happens when a gifted, lonely child reaches up toward a hero and gets his hand slapped away. He is not a villain because he was born evil. He is a villain because the person he needed most told him to go home. Next is Aizen from the Bleach. Aizen is the captain of Squad 5 in the Gotei 13, the governing military body of Soul Society in Bleach. He is one of the most respected, beloved, and trusted captains in the entire organization, known for his calm demeanor, extraordinary intelligence, and apparent warmth toward his subordinates. He mentors multiple Soul Reapers directly, most significantly Momo Hinamori, his lieutenant, who trusts him with a devotion that borders on worship. Whenever Hinamori came to him seeking guidance, Aizen used to talk to her very warmly and kindly, but the reality was something else. Actually, he was a manipulator who had spent years cultivating her emotional dependency as a weapon. In my view, he's a horrible teacher, and his whole method of mentoring was the most sophisticated form of manipulating people throughout the entire series. Everything he did in order to maintain his power and position was achieved through manipulation or deception. In the moment that was the worst, when Aizen's betrayal being revealed, he could have chosen to leave Soul Society quietly, but he opted not to. Instead, he staged a theatrical murder to leave maximum chaos and suspicion within the Soul Society by staging a murder and having all the details of his murder scripted out. When Hinamori went to avenge her captain, she found herself standing in front of the real Aizen, whom she believed had been murdered, and could have shown her mercy. He could have explained himself. He could have acknowledged the genuine connection they had built, but instead his response was cold and absolute. He ran her through with his sword without hesitation. Even after everything, even after he stabbed her, even after his betrayal was exposed, she struggled to fully hate him because the attachment he built was that deep and real to her. Though Aizen was so powerful that consequence itself had to be specially engineered for him, and he was sentenced to 20,000 years of imprisonment in the deepest underground prison in Soul Society. Bound in a chair with sealing technology covering his entire body, Aizen never lost control, never acted out of anger, never made a mistake he did not intend. And that is exactly what makes him so devastating as a mentor figure. He is the villain who calculated every moment of connection, every word of praise, every gesture of care-all as part of a grand design where people were never anything more than instruments in his symphony of deception. Next is Jing Free CSS from Hunter 10. Again, one of the most efficient heroes alive in Hunter x Hunter is Jing Free CSS, one of them, a double-star ruins hunter, a founder of the Zodiac 12, and generally regarded as one of the 5 best users of Nen in the world. He is also Gon Frasisse's father. He left Gon behind as a baby and was left to be raised by his Aunt Mito on Whale Island, and spent a few years touring the world chasing his personal goals without having any form of contact with his son. He would make himself feel that he was doing the right thing, that adventure and freedom was more than presence. In addition to this, he even resembled a man who philosophized his way to become a hero, to sacrifice the common associations of family to something higher, but the truth was otherwise. In fact, he was a man who was too absorbed in his own ambitions to an extent that he justified dumping his child as an act of wisdom. He never misused, Gon, or warped him. His harm came in a more sinister manner, in the absence and ideology. He made a philosophy where personal freedom, adventure, and the pursuit of individual desire were the utmost values, and lived by that worldview to its full potential, to the point that his own child was an acceptable casualty of it. However, the truth is that he was consciously giving precedence to all the adventures, all the discovery, all the instances of personal satisfaction at the expense of the child that he had made. He confused egoism with philosophy and named his renouncement enlightenment. And the most bad was the rooftop scene of the end of Chimera Ant Arc. No longer a wholly destroyed man after nearly destroying himself in the quest to exact revenge and mourning, Gon was brought back and was eventually able to see his father in person on the summit of the World Tree. The climax of reunion that the whole series had been leading up to at last came. Jing would have made a true father at that time. He might have provided true presence. His answer, however, was habitual, nearly violent himself, irregular and evasive and incapable at that particular moment of practicing the emotional availability which demanded. He discussed adventure when his son had to be acknowledged, but they claimed that what comes around comes round. There were no official repercussions on Jing, and the show did not serve as a dramatic payback on his behalf. What he met was more subtle. The World Tree reunion brought him the presence of Gon, and nothing more than that. Gon had pardoned him, or nearly, with the reproving good nature which was his lot. Forgiveness, however, which is caused to a child who has been raised to idolize you, does not equal absolution. Gon deserved better. Jing knew it. His next adventure was worth more, as he has just decided. Next is Griffith from Berserk. Griffith is the leader and founder of the Band of the Hawk, a legendary mercenary band that emerges out of nothing and emerges as the most glorified military organization in the Kingdom of Midland. He is the closest friend of Guts, the commander, and the most valuable person in his life over years. Griffith always met with the members of the Band of the Hawk with a warm and inspirational demeanor whenever they would discuss with him about guidance and leadership. He could demonstrate to them that he is a leader with a beautiful dream. To top it all, he could actually resemble the image of someone that they could depend upon entirely and follow blindly. But it was not really like that. In reality, he was a manipulator and considered all followers as his instruments of his rise to power. Well, I think he is a bad teacher and a bad authority figure. However, in the real sense, he was deliberately raising individuals who were so much attached to him that would perish unquestioningly when the time arrived. And the most terrible thing was the eclipse, the one most disastrous betrayal in anime and manga history. By turning on the billet, Griffith made each and every member of the Band of the Hawk be devoured by demons to be reborn as Femto, so he could further his dream of becoming a god. He then attacked Casca in the presence of powerless Guts before his transformation occurred to its fullest extent. The Band of the Hawk was practically destroyed. Guts lost the love of a woman. The trauma shattered the mind of Casca. The whole life of Guts post-eclipse is the direct and complete result of what Griffith stole out of him in one act of betrayal in serene stillness. However, they say that what comes around comes around. No, not completely at least. And that is the most truthful and heart-rending storytelling decision ever made by Berserk. Griffith came back as Femto and refounded the Band of the Hawk, brought in new followers, started to build the city of Falcania, and also made himself a savior of humanity. The world rewarded him. His toxic system did not break down. He is the image of a leader who was fully aware of what he was doing and made his vision worth more than even human life itself. Principal from American Dad. In American Dad, the main authority figure of the group of friends of Steve Smith is Principal Lewis, who is the principal of the Pearl Bailey High School. He is boastful, egocentric, ethically bankrupt, and hugely unsuited to his job in a manner that the show considers as comedy. He is a man who has control over hundreds of teenagers. Lewis would also make himself appear authoritative and confident whenever students approached him to seek guidance and support. He would appear like a character whom students could confide in and rely on their issues, but that was not the truth of the matter. I think he is a bad teacher and a bad authority figure, as his whole attitude to his job was on extraction instead of education. He never showed students a lesson about integrity or responsibility. However, in actual sense, he was deliberately abusing school resources to personal advantage. All his leadership did not involve education, but stealing by institutions, stealing a salary and a title with no return whatsoever to the students he was meant to serve. And the most terrible thing was, not a single classic scene but a uniform, asphyxiating policy of conduct which had added up to a portrait of such negligence. His failure is well exemplified by any scene in which one of the students took him to a real crisis, such as a case of bullying or a learning problem or a real need. And his reaction was to turn it into one about himself. Lewis might have been a real grown man at such times. He might have provided actual direction. He might have exercised his power to assist. Rather, he always responded to things by swerving due to the combination of all the rules of Lewis, all his methods. Pearl Bailey High School had turned out to be a place where students basically operated without any realistic adult infrastructure backing them. But they say what goes around comes around. In the comic reasoning behind American Dad, Lewis would be punished and grossly held responsible one episode at a time until the reset button restored the world to normal. The thing is that Principal Lewis was neither an educator nor an administrator. He's the authority figure, the one who never actually existed, and in a list of grotesque monsters that elaborate quiet absence is precisely what makes him so excruciatingly real. Next, Dio Brando from the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Dio Brando is the main antagonist of JoJo Bizarre Adventure, as well as one of the most famous villains in the entire world of anime and manga. He starts his life as the son of a small thief who became an integral part of the rich family Joestar when his father passed away. He became the adopted brother of Jonathan Joestar. He subsequently becomes a vampire, with the help of an ancient stone mask which he uses to reinvent himself, and lives through the centuries and becomes a kind of god. With a cult of loyal followers worldwide by Part 3, Dio would respect and thank the Joestar family whenever they gave him advice and compassion. He used to demonstrate to them that he would be a worthy companion of their home. On top of that, he would resemble like a grateful orphan whom they could trust and take care of. The truth, however, was otherwise. In fact, he was a hunter and considered benevolence as a sign of weakness and gratitude as a weapon to wield. He desired total mastery over all things, and he used to dominate all things in an organized sadism and a cold-blooded treachery. And in a way, he is a bad teacher, bad authority figure, since it was all based on one thing: strong exists to govern, and the weak exists to serve. And sentiment is weak, which will be used for a long time. He did not even teach anyone to develop and to learn about themselves. He instead also taught them that devotion was a leash, love was leverage, and that loyalty to him was the only thing that counted. He would display to the followers a simulated world in which servitude to him equated to cause and power. Yet in fact, he was consciously picking his victims at their most sensitive times, their ambitions, their grudges, their loneliness, and turning them into complete subservience to him individually. As a vampire god, he used to rule above, and his followers were replaceable instruments. The whole guidance was not direction but coercion, in which he made everyone around him his projections of his will. And the most lamentable thing was his systematic breaking up of Jonathan Joestar since he entered Joestar House. Dio took away Jonathan and his friends, his status among friends and parents. He appropriated all that Jonathan possessed and made it his own. However, the one most characteristic act of cruelty was poisoning George Joestar, the one who welcomed him and raised him like a son, just to get a bit of inheritance money. Dio would have been grateful at that time. He would have respected the benevolence that spared his life. However, he reacted with utter treachery. He poisoned his own hand that fed him. He murdered his own father who loved him. He did it out of calculation rather than out of anger, since sentiment seemed to him like weakness. And his effect on people was just terrible due to the influence of Dio. Every rule of Dio, all his teachings had worked his world into an abode of unconditional tyranny in which all the people about him who called him to question, they were accustomed to encounter extermination. He would get rid of them without hesitation by throwing them aside like weapons, sacrificing them by discarding them like waste material, where all the followers who had fallen under his control failed to obey him to the end. Jonathan was killed, he had to fight his adopted brother, and eventually died during his honeymoon. His blood was devastated with the repercussions of Dio more than a century. The followers in his Part 3 were individuals whose loyalty cost them their lives. Even Enrico Pucci in Part 6 is the end product of the harm of Dio's philosophy, the man being so perverted by the philosophy of Dio that after his death, he tried to recreate the whole universe according to his own vision. But they say that what comes round goes round. He was forced to pay a price on this. In Part 1, Jonathan had gotten him stopped at his own peril. Later in Part 3, he was defeated by Jotaro Kujo in one of the most recognizable fights in anime history, as the latter turned the ability to stop time that was possessed by Dio against him and killed him in the daytime. His entire manipulative toxic system failed, but the series is not shy about his legacy. Parts 4, 5, and 6 are dwellings on the continued effects of his life. The thing is that Dio Brando was neither a real mentor nor a real person. He was a monster who wore a mask of a human being. He had gone into a house that had given him it all: family, fortune, home, a future, and had decided to set it on fire because it was the only way that he could feel weak. He spent eternity instructing all those nearby on the fact that love is leverage and loyalty is a leash. The stone mask was not used to make him a monster. He was always one. The mask just made it visible. Next is Ratcliffe from Pocahontas. The main villain in the movie Pocahontas at Disney is Governor Ratcliffe. He is the colonial governor which brings English people to the New World, portrayed as a respectable authority icon and leader. He also happens to be the man who mentors and commands John Smith, who appeared to be the main hero of the film, who regards Ratcliffe as his superior officer and authority figure. Ratcliffe used to speak to him with authority and confidence whenever John Smith approached him to give him advice and instructions. He would demonstrate to him that he is a highly potent leader and an insightful commander. That was on top of the fact that he would resemble a legitimate authority on whom Smith could trust and follow. But the fact was different. In fact, he was a predator who did not perceive the New World as the discovery, but he saw it as resource to be exploited. And above all, he desired wealth and power, and he manipulated everything: prejudice and systematic dehumanization. In my view, though, he is a bad teacher and a bad authority figure, since his whole philosophy was shaped on greed in the guise of civilization. He had never tutored John Smith toward maturity or realization. Rather, he tutored him to be obedient towards his vision of colonization. He taught settlers that the Native Americans were the barriers to be eliminated rather than to be comprehended. He also applied his power to legitimize genocide as advancement and profit. He would present his men with an imaginary world where by conquering the land he would be creating a great civilization. However, in the real sense, he was deliberately indoctrinating them into prejudice, violence, and demeaning human life. He'd been able to uphold his stance of good status quo and plan the loot of lands and resources under wraps. In the meantime, the Powhatan nation was being hunted. Their territory was being ravaged, their peasants were being branded to death. His whole rule was not a government but an organized robbery, and not a murder, but all in the name of progress. And the most terrible was when Ratcliffe gave the order to hang Powhatan and the invasion of the Native American community. This was not wartime necessity. This was pure gouging and vengeance. When his gold mining fantasy was torpedoed, at that point Ratcliffe would have admitted the reality. He might have made a retreat. He could have chosen peace, but rather he replied with anger and aggression. He exploited the faith of the settlers in his authority to make it to become a tool of his vengeance. He gave them an order to carry out genocide since his ambitions were frustrated. He did not think of Powhatan as an individual, and as a leader, he thought of him as an impediment to his fortunes, and the effect of Ratcliffe on all around him was most deplorable. Due to the fact that all of the rules of Ratcliffe, all his teachings turned the colony into the place where violence is justified and dehumanization is a normalized condition, where all the settlers he was in charge of, in the event that they had doubts on his vision, they were punished and pressured into conformity. John Smith was also influenced into almost perpetrating atrocities under the directive of Ratcliffe. The whole population of settlers was transformed into colonizers, ready to spearhead their violence against individuals they had never attempted to know. Powhatan Nation was confronted with genocide due to the greed and prejudice in the name of civilization and progress by Ratcliffe. Nevertheless, they say that what comes around goes around. He had to suffer the consequence of this. When his treachery was revealed, Ratcliffe was arrested and was returning to England in chains. He lost his power, his liberty, and his status. His entire manipulative toxic system broke down as his actual nature is uncovered. The thing is that Ratcliffe is not a real leader, is not a real civilizer. He is a thief and a murderer who wore the robes of authority. He never saw people, he saw resources. He shaped his avarice in the terminology of progress and civilization and killed a whole nation almost to gratify his ambition. He is the best example of how power can be turned into a deadly weapon to commit evil. Next is Hisoka Moro from Hunter Ting. One of the most mysterious and disconcerting characters in Hunter x Hunter is Hisoka Moro, a magician, a fighter, and a predator who lives outside the standard Moro classification. A teacher or mentor in any institutional sense, he positions himself in a mentorship proximate situation with Gon Freesysaurus throughout the series in both extremely intentional and extremely disturbing ways. He is one of the strongest Nen users in the world, a former Phantom Troop member, and a man who lives the whole of his life in such a way that he finds the right people to fight and kills them in maximum freshness. When Hisoka met Gon in the Hunter exam and even later, he would talk to him interestedly and seemingly respectfully. He would demonstrate to him that he can see his potential and appreciate his development. To top it all, he once resembled a strong individual whom Gon could learn or admire. But the fact of the matter was otherwise. In fact, he was a predator who had spotted Gon early as a person with outstanding potential and a calculated move to allow him to live, mature, and grow with the specific aim of fighting him in future and making it more fulfilling. He desired to feed on Gon when at his best, and as in his patience, his appetite, and the gradual preparation of a future victim. Well, on my part, I would say he is a bad mentor since all his relations with Gon are founded on predatory calculation in the guise of interest. He did not intend to impart anything valuable to Gon or educate him to be an individual. He simply wished to develop Gon as a farmer raises crops, nurturing his strength, observing his growth, biding his time till he will harvest him at the time that the crop will cause him the greatest satisfaction. He would present Gon with a false reality in which the two were related with respect and real interest in each other. However, in the real sense, he had been training a fighter with the sole purpose of him consuming it in the long run. He stepped in at the opportune times, such as saving Gon at the Hunter exam, giving him indirect advice, all of which was unmotivated by sincerity. It came from appetite. All the seeming guidance was simply the patient preparations of a predator enveloping himself in anticipation of the kill. All his relationship with Gon was not guidance but rearing the systematic raising of a victim made expressly to the purpose of his hunger when the moment arrived. And the most awful thing was the way Hisoka would act when he was in the Heaven Arena arc and his relationship with Gon through the series. He expressed his intentions towards Gon in a very clear manner, which was accompanied by compliments but was used in reference to threats. He even explained to Gon point blank that he was eager to the day he would fight him in reality. Gon was given his tag during a hunter exam not because he is generous, but because Gon was not of age to be worth destroying. It is at those times that Hisoka would have made a real mentor. He would have provided real advice, but rather, his words were ever the countdown, a tedious hunter biding his time till his victim was big enough to be worth the trouble. The effect of Hisoka on Gon was truly disturbing, since it gave him a psychological pressure as the knowledge that one of the most dangerous people alive was concerned about his growth and waiting on him were present all the time. The fact that Gon knows that Hisoka was interested in him served as a low-level threat throughout his growth. Gon learned to handle his strength, his boundaries, his future. Each solved a crystal that could merce. When Viking on, when Gon will be worth destroying. The whole game between them was developed on the fact that Gon was not even aware of how fully he was being assessed as a potential victim. But they say what comes around goes round. Hisoka was punished as Chrollo Lucifer defeated him in a violent fight, a defeat that was so absolute that Hisoka died and had to resurrect himself. However, instead of taking it as a byproduct, Hisoka took it as a challenge as he declared war on the whole Phantom Troop. Consequence working on Hisoka does not work as it works on other characters. The former takes it in, recalibrates, and gets more dangerous. The thing is that Hisokamura was never a genuine mentor. He was a predator who used to depend on the fact that everyone misunderstood what he was. He had seen Gon mature as one who had no idea what he was waiting on. He was not interested in molding Gon and controlling him. He was keen to be around when Gon was finally made something worth breaking. That is not mentorship. It is interest masquerading as a countdown, and it is one of the most truthful portraits of rapaciousness on this whole list. Next, Lancer from Dannon Fornet, the direct academic authority figure that oversees Danny Fenton, his friends Sam and Tucker, is Mr. Lancer, a vice principal / English teacher at Casper High School. He is overly pompous, highly stressed, and in terms of work, he is characterized by his obsession with academic performance and institutional image. He is not a manipulative and evil person in any grand sense of this word. He is a more mundane and more annoying person, a teacher who is constantly sure that he is doing good to his students, yet cannot always see them as fully human people. Lancer would appear authoritative and worried whenever Danny approached him with academic problems and dropping grades. He used to demonstrate to him that he is concerned about the future and the education of Danny, and on top of this, he used to resemble someone whom Danny would depend upon and who could help him, but the fact of it was otherwise. In fact, he was an institutionally preoccupied, surface-performing man who was totally oblivious to the real human person before him. He desired academic success and reputation of the institution over it all, and he controlled it all by punishing and assuming that all the problems were moral failure. Well, to my mind, he is a bad teacher and a bad authority figure, since his whole philosophy consisted of looking past students to see grades and performance measurements only. He was not interested in the lives of his students at all, not even in the slightest, and there was no system of knowledge that would allow him to comprehend that something may be going on beyond the classroom, that they may not be acting in line with his story. He never trained Danny to look at himself as good or competent, but taught him that he was a failure. A lazy person, something to be controlled. He used to demonstrate to the students an imaginary world where studying was stimulating and punishment instructive. However, in the real sense, he was knowingly overlooking all indications that something indeed was amiss, and he was reading all these as moral weakness instead of situation. Danny Fenton was leading a truly impossible dual existence: the school, family, friendships, and the undercover obligation of keeping his whole town safe against the onslaught of supernatural beings. Curiosity or concern never entered into it with Lancer. It was punishment, academic probation, and the unremitting belief that Danny was merely lazy. It was not education, but institutional theater that was his whole approach. And the most awful part was how he treated Danny in several episodes where the duties of a ghost fighter directly led to academic and behavioral problems, and Lancer punished him with no explanation. He received all indications that something was actually amiss with the student and preferred institutional practice to the child before him. It is at such times that Lancer might have posed a genuine question. He could have listened. He would have perceived Danny as an individual and not a performance measure. Instead, he reacted by increasing punishment in the presence of the apparent suffering to making the decision that was good on his books not the human price. And the effect of Lancer was insidious yet inescapable on all the students subject to his jurisdiction. All the regulations of Lancer, all his methods, had made Casper High the school at which pupils were taught that authority figures were hurdles to be crossed and not ladders to be climbed. Adding to all the stresses his dual existence required, Danny had to bear the burden of Lancer as a student, something that had to be balanced on top of other stressful life aspects that were of a comedic nature instead of being a real failure of the adult system. Sam and Tucker picked up institutional distrust by observing as their friend was punished due to a situation that was totally out of his reach. What they all learned was obvious. Adults in high places will not notice you. They will get to know your grades, your behavior, your superficial features of performance, but they will not see you. However, they say that everything comes around. Lancer was punished now and then, outsmarted by Danny, caught in ghost-related messes, humiliated by circumstances he was unable to describe. The exhibition would sometimes provide him with a sense of true warmth or almost an understanding which hinted at development, but these moments never followed up with the actual development. He finished the series the way he started it, a man who was interested in education in general and who failed the concrete students who were supposed to be benefited by it. The thing is that Mr. Turf, Lancer was never a teacher. He was just a bureaucrat with a badge of a teacher. He's the type of bad teacher that crams live schools. Not cruel enough to be reported, not negligent enough to be terminated, but always in the bad place at the right time. He was blessed with a superhero in his classroom on a day-to-day basis, a child who had more than any adult in the building, and the only thing he could ever ask was why the homework was late. He did not fail Danny Phantom. He failed Danny Fenton, and he never saw the difference at all. Next, Gato from Naruto. Gato is the main antagonist of the Land of Waves arc, the first major story arc of Naruto. He is the leader of Gato Company, a shipping and trade company that operates as a criminal empire under its legal facade. He has acquired his fortune and employed mercenaries to fully monopolize the Land of Waves to choke its economy, hold its citizens in fear and poverty, then lock out any outside assistance to the remote country. Gato always presented himself as a person of authority and business-like professionalism whenever he interacted with the people of the Land of Waves. He would demonstrate to them that he is a strong man who dictates their fate. To top it all, he even used to appear like a figure of authority that they could not oppose or avoid. However, the fact was different. In fact, he was a freeloader who did not perceive a whole country as a community, but as something to squeeze out. Fear and poverty were his desired means of absolute power, and he was accustomed to governing everything with the help of systematic oppression, employed assassins, and economic strangulation. Well, to my mind, he is a bad teacher and a bad authority figure, since his whole model of authority was straight extraction with no pretense of responsibility. He did not lead, he consumed. He had given the population of the Land of Waves just a single lesson by years of methodical repression. Hope is dangerous, resistance is fatal, and submission is the only sensible reaction to power we must have, not only to power but to obedience. He would give them a false reality in which his domination was unavoidable and unavoidable. In practice, though, he was merely hiring assassins to be used like expendable tools, mercenaries to be his henchmen, and economic strangulation to put a stranglehold on the throat of whole nation. He would live a comfortable life as he was in his high place of power, and families were dying. Hope was being killed, and a whole generation was being educated that the world was not built to defend the weak. The whole secret of his rule was not the rule, but organized robbery, the systematic plundering of a nation and its resources and spirit in his own person. And the most unpleasant thing was the way he treated Zabuza and Haku when they were beaten. He brought a small force of mercenaries to clear up the already dying Zabuza, taunted him as the means that had lived long enough, and had his men attack the body of Haku, a child who died defending one that he loved. In the same instance, Gato would have demonstrated at least some form of humanity. He might have recognized the sacrifice made by Zabuza, or have respected the services of Haku, but rather he looked at me with an indifferent scorn. He shoved them about like an indifferent person who has never thought of people surrounding him as human beings but as resources. He kicked a corpse. He mocked a dying man. All this he did with the calmness of a person who felt absolutely beyond the reach of anyone. And the influence of Gato had a fatal effect on all his subjects. Since everything of Gato, everything of his teaching had brought the land of waves into a kind of organized despair in which every man who lived in it, assuming he challenged his power and attempted to oppose it, economic ruin and death awaited him. Young boy Inari had been influenced to the point that Gato was king, that heroism was a falsehood and hope an illusion of a dream. His father character Kaiza made an attempt to oppose Gato and was publicly shot as a lesson to all onlookers. A whole generation was raised understanding that the world is the possession of whoever has enough wickedness to possess it. The land of waves was a land not only throttling economically, but it was a spiritually crippled land, Gato having systematically bred despair in it. However, they say what goes round comes around. He was immediately and conclusively punished. When Zabuza was finally overcome by his emotional wall after the death of Haku, he even cut through all of the mercenaries at the same arc and killed Gato in one of the most catharsis moments of the entire movie with his teeth, as his arms were so damaged that he could not use a sword. The man who spent the arc and treated all the people around him as dispensable tools was killed by the tool that he last deposited. His entire system of toxic collapsed when his mercenaries discovered they were disposable just like any other person. The thing is that Gato was never a leader and was a suitcase parasite. He never threw a punch or trained a student or held a title higher than that of businessman. But he made an entire country understand that the world is to be possessed by whoever can be cruel enough to possess it. He confused silence of people who were frightened with respect of conquered people. Zabuza provided him with the death he deserved, and the land of waves began to breathe once more as soon as he fell to the ground. Next, Don Quixote do Flamingo from a One Piece. One Piece is home to many of the strongest and most dramatic villains, with one of them being Don Quixote do Flamingo, a past world noble, a warlord of the sea, the ruler of the kingdom of Dressrosa, and the leader of the Don Quixote pirates. He is a man who lives in the crossroads of all power frameworks of the One Piece world at the same time, a noble, a pirate, a government, a criminal underworld, and coordinates them all with the skill of its fingertips. Doflamingo would always speak to broken people in warm and sincere appreciation and understanding whenever he spotted them in their lowest state. He used to demonstrate to them that he recognizes their potential and provides them with a home. To top all these, he would appear like a savior to whom they could look up to and rely on him to lead them to a better future. However, the truth was otherwise. In fact, he was a predator, and he preyed on the desperate because they were in a difficult position. He desired unquestioning obedience by artificial devotion and by means of seductive tutelage which concealed a species of calculated exploitation. He had been accustomed to dominate everything. Well, in my mind, he is a bad teacher and a bad role model, since all his mentoring approach was good on the surface but bad on the inside. He discovered individuals at their most destitute, the dying, the desperate, and gave them a sense of belonging, purpose, and power which he fulfilled to the extent that an element of devotion was aroused. However, at its base, it was exploitation. He did not make an investment in his crew because he was concerned about them. He made an investment in them because a loyal crew is a better tool than a panicked one. He would present his followers with a phony reality in which they were important members of a family where their loyalty was returned with sincere concern. But in fact, he was deliberately molding them into weapons of his own, training their loyalty so thoroughly that they would do anything he ordered without even thinking of it. His whole philosophy taught that the world was segmented based on the strength of whoever was to be the ruler and the weakness of whoever was to be the ruled, and all the people below him were merely awaiting to know which they were. His style of leadership was not mentorship, but psychological manipulation so good that it resembled love, and worst of all was the way he treated Law throughout his life with her. He adopted a dying child, a boy who had an incurable disease, and has lost all that was his, and instead of trying to actually provide him with real refuge, he got to work at once forming Law into a weapon so he could use it himself. As soon as Law showed any heartfelt attachment to Corazon, to Doflamingo himself, the man who was the only really loving relationship that Law had ever known, it was the response of Doflamingo that was ruthless in its intensity. He murdered Corazon right before the eyes of Law. He killed his brother and ruined the only real relation that Law had ever possessed. He did it to destroy Law totally, to demonstrate him that in the world of Doflamingo, love was a weakness that would be used. He wanted Law to realize that he should not be attached, and that Doflamingo was the only one who could be called to the carpet. And the influence of Doflamingo was so ruinous to all his subjects. His regime had become a factory where their actions turned men into instruments and wiped them off the face of the earth as punishment due to all the rules of Doflamingo, all of his teachings. Several years after the loss were spent by Law in grief and revenge, and his whole post-time travel path was predetermined by the things Doflamingo deprived him of. The citizens of Dressrosa were in a state of manufactured dependency. Doflamingo made people toys and forgot them by their loved ones. The most tragic is maybe Baby 5, a woman who is psychologically damaged to the point of not being constitutionally able to say no to anyone in need of her, a weakness that Doflamingo used nonchalantly and without hesitation. All his crew consisted of fallen human beings whom he had persuaded that none could be broken but only through their love to him. But they say that what comes around goes round. He was thoroughly and full satisfyingly punished. Luffy overcame Doflamingo with Gear 4th, and the residents of Dressrosa finally got to settle the score with everything he did to them. Admiral Fujitora had Doflamingo arrested and sent to Impel Down. His criminal system went down, he lost his grip on Dressrosa, and the image of the beloved king was torn to pieces in full view. It was the destruction of his entire toxic apparatus when his authority was at last equaled and surpassed. The thing is that Don Quixote Doflamingo was never a leader. He was a predator who disguised exploitation under the guise of family. He picked up the fallen ones, the discarded, the dying, the desperate, and gave them a hand lifted which was at the same time a leash at the throat. He created a family out of individuals without any other place to find and educated them that his vision of the world was the only truthful one. The worst aspect of him is that to a few of them it was more than a family, real enough to suffer, real enough to sacrifice life itself, real enough to make it impossible to part with it. He knew that was intentionally constructed by him. Next is Frollo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Judge Claude Frollo is the Minister of Justice in Disney's The Hunchback of Notre Dame and the man who raised Quasimodo from infancy. He is a high-ranking religious and political authority figure in Paris, a man of immense power, deep theological conviction, and absolute certainty in his own righteousness. He adopted Quasimodo as a baby after murdering his mother on the steps of Notre Dame Cathedral and locked him up in the bell tower for 20 years in solitude. Whenever Quasimodo sought guidance from him, Frollo used to talk to him with religious authority and apparent care. He used to show him that he is a very devoted guardian and a righteous mentor. On top of that, he used to look like a protective figure on whom Quasimodo could trust with his life, but the reality was something else. Actually, he was a jailer who kept Quasimodo locked away not for protection, but for control. He wanted absolute power over Quasimodo's mind and soul, and he used to control everything through psychological imprisonment and religious manipulation. Well, in my opinion, he is a bad teacher and a bad guardian because his entire method of guardianship was built on psychological imprisonment and self-loathing. He never taught Quasimodo to grow or to believe in himself. Instead, he taught him that he was a monster, that the outside world would only ever see him as hideous, that he should be grateful to exist at all. He used to show Quasimodo a world that was not quite real, a world in which the bell tower was a place of safety and refuge. But in reality, he was intentionally keeping him locked away, conditioning him into total dependence and crushing self-hatred. He used religious language and the concept of debt as tools of control, constantly reminding Quasimodo that Frollo spared his life, that Quasimodo owed him obedience, that love and connection were dangerous sins. He used to live his own life in the city with power and authority, while Quasimodo lived in isolation above the bells. Meanwhile, Quasimodo was psychologically destroyed, broken in the most quiet and invisible way. His whole education was a lesson plan in shame and fear to keep him locked up forever. And the worst moment was when Quasimodo finally stood up to Frollo and helped Esmeralda. At that moment, Frollo could have shown some mercy. He could have accepted that his adopted son had become a man in his own right. Instead, he showed his true face in ultimate cruelty. He bound Quasimodo in the bell tower and forced him to watch Paris burn while he set out to kill Esmeralda. He used Quasimodo's love and compassion against him, punched him for caring about another human being. 20 years of teaching a child that love and connection were dangerous culminated in Frollo literally binding that child to watch the world suffer. He didn't protect Quasimodo, he imprisoned him for daring to feel. And Frollo's guidance had a very bad impact on the person under his control. because all the rules of Frollo, all his teachings, had made the bell tower a prison where Quasimodo lived in constant psychological torture, where Quasimodo internalized every lie Frollo told him, that he was ugly beyond acceptance, that the world outside was cruel and would only mock him, that he owed Frollo his obedience and his entire existence. Quasimodo entered the film completely broken. He believed he was a monster. He believed he could never be loved. He believed that leaving the bell tower meant certain rejection and pain. Frollo had spent 20 years cultivating these beliefs, nurturing them, making them so deep that Quasimodo couldn't see they were lies. The entire arc of Quasimodo's story is the painful process of unlearning 20 years of Frollo's curriculum. Even after Frollo was defeated, the film acknowledges that some things cannot simply be handed back. Some wounds run too deep. Later, he faced consequences for this. Frollo met his death at the climax of the film, falling from Notre Dame after his obsession and arrogance consumed him entirely. In his final moments, he was still quoting scripture and casting himself as righteous even as he plummeted to his death. He faced no legal or institutional consequences, but he died having failed at everything he wanted. He lost Quasimodo, he lost control, he lost his life. His whole manipulative toxic system crumbled the moment Quasimodo found the strength to break free. The fact is that Frollo was never a real guardian or a real mentor. He was a jailer who put a mask of piety and protection. He never had any intention of helping Quasimodo grow or find happiness. He only wanted to control him, to keep him imprisoned, to use him as a validation of his own righteousness. Frollo raised the child the way some people tend a garden, trimming everything that grew toward the light, keeping it contained, making sure it never outgrew its pot. He called it protection. He called it mercy. He called it duty. What he actually built over 20 years was a prison with a person inside it, and he slept well every single night convinced he was the hero of that story. He was not. He was a monster dressed in the robes of authority, and his legacy is nothing but the damage he left behind. Next is All for One from My Hero Academia. All for One is the supreme villain of My Hero Academia, a centuries-old figure who has operated in the shadows of hero society since its earliest days. He is the leader of the League of Villains, the archenemy of All Might, and the man who shaped the entire villain ecosystem of the series from behind the scenes. Most relevantly, he is the surrogate father figure and master of Tomura Shigaraki, whom he took in as a traumatized, abandoned child and personally groomed into the successor he wanted. Whenever Shigaraki came to him seeking guidance and comfort, All for One used to talk to him very gently and kindly. He used to show him that he is a very caring mentor and a powerful protector. On top of that, he used to look like a trustworthy figure on whom Shigaraki could depend completely. But the reality was something else. Actually, he was a manipulator who had engineered Shigaraki's trauma from the very beginning. He wanted Shigaraki as a weapon, as a successor, as a vessel for his own power, and he used to control everything through calculated corruption and dependency. Well, in my opinion, he is a bad teacher because his entire method of mentorship was one of the most deliberate and calculated forms of corruption in the entire series. He never taught Shigaraki to grow independently or to become his own person. Instead, he taught him to want destruction, to rage without purpose, to depend on All for One for every decision, every validation, every sense of identity. He would show Shigaraki a world where he was saved and protected by All for One, but in truth, he was actively disassembling whatever was left of Tenko Shimura's personality and reassembling it into Tomura Shigaraki, a being crafted entirely from hatred and destruction. Meanwhile, Shigaraki was psychologically destroyed, his sense of self obliterated, his capacity for independent thought systematically dismantled. His entire education was a curriculum of corruption designed to turn a traumatized child into an instrument of chaos. And the worst moment was the revelation of Shigaraki's origin, All for One's defining crime. As a mentor, All for One was present the night young Tenko's quirk manifested and killed his entire family. He watched it happen. He saw the child surrounded by corpses. At that moment, All for One could have helped. He could have offered genuine salvation and healing. But instead, he did nothing. He watched, and then in the most calculated act of psychological manipulation, he approached the traumatized child in the aftermath and offered his hand. He made himself the only comfort in the worst moment of Tenko's life, ensuring his attachment would be absolute and unbreakable. He engineered the trauma and then positioned himself as the cure. He didn't save Shigaraki, he infected him, and All for One's guidance had a very bad impact on everyone around him. Because all the rules of All for One, all his teachings, had made the League of Villains a place where people were treated as tools and quirk repositories with complete indifference, where all the villains around him that questioned his methods, they used to live in a fear environment, where all the people that came under his influence, if they didn't obey him completely, he used to discard them without hesitation. Shigaraki especially was broken in the most profound way. He grew into a person who genuinely could not conceptualize himself outside of destruction, who existed only to erase things because that was the only identity he was ever given. He didn't know who Tanko Shimura was anymore. All for One had systematically erased that person and replaced him with Tomura Shigaraki, a weapon. Beyond Shigaraki, All for One had corrupted, used, and discarded countless others across generations, treating them as nothing but pawns in his centuries-long game. Their entire lives were destroyed by his manipulation. But they say that what goes around comes around. He had to face consequences for this, though it took heroes willing to stand against him. All for One faced repeated defeats, first by All Might in their legendary battle that cost All Might his own power, then again in later confrontations. He was imprisoned in Tartarus, though he eventually escaped. His grand plan to fully possess Shigaraki and make him a permanent vessel began to unravel as Shigaraki developed his own sense of self that resisted the takeover. His whole manipulative toxic system crumbled the moment his creation began to think for himself. The fact is that All for One was never a real mentor or a real father. He was a predator who put a mask of care and strength. He never had any intention of helping Shigaraki grow or find peace. He never intended for him to be anything else, just a tool for him, a successor, a means of channeling his pain into a power that All for One could control forever. All for One found a child at the bottom of the worst moment of his life, and instead of offering him salvation, offered him a leash and called it love. He is not the most powerful villain because of his quirks or his strength. He is the most dangerous because he knows exactly how to make someone believe that destruction is the only thing they were ever meant for. He is the series' argument that the most dangerous mentor is not the one who teaches through force, but the one who teaches through the language of care while systematically erasing everything the student could become.